Hello, and welcome to Global Sports Brand Build Default Tolerance Disaster Recovery Strategy using Commvault and AWS. Uh, just a few housekeeping items to get us started. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to join either from the phone or your computer's audio. If for any reason you want to change your selection, you can do so by just accessing the audio pane in your control panel. In addition, on that control panel, you can submit questions to today's presenters by typing them in the question pane. We'll collect those and answer them in the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. But don't worry if for any reason we're unable to get to your question due to time. We will plan on catching up with each person and sending an email reply. The deck will also be available through SlideShare, along with the recording of the webinar 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of the presentation. So keep an eye out for that email. With that being said, my name is Henry Axelrod. I'm a partner solution architect at AWS, and I'll be the host and moderator of today's webinar. In addition to myself, I'm going to be joined today with Gina James, who's the Global Alliance Manager of Cloud at Commvault. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about Commvault and the sports brand story. So first of all, to get started, I want to talk a little bit about backup and restore on AWS. So to give everyone an idea of AWS is comprised of different geographical regions around the world. We currently have 21 geographical regions and 66 availability zones within those regions. Now, to give you an idea, a geographic region is a location around the world where we cluster our data centers. Each availability zone is comprised of one or more data centers or one or more buildings. It's at least one building, but can be more than one building as well. Each availability zone is fault isolated so that customers are protected if they put their if they use one availability zone. That being said, we're also planning 4 additional regions and 12 additional availability zones that have currently been announced. So what are some of the core components that AWS has in terms of storage solutions? Well, there's 3 main components, and we see them as working very much together. So first component is AWS services. And those AWS services, which include the storage services as well as other services that AWS provides, provide really the scale, durability, and economics that customers need to deploy their own services, solutions, and workloads on AWS. Second is our AWS technology partners. And partners like Commvault that you hear from today, they're able to take either existing on-premises solutions or new solutions that they built on top of AWS to add advanced functionality to the services that AWS offers and that provide benefit to our customers. Finally, there's consulting partners, and consulting partners really work with both AWS services as well as our technology partner solutions to really help customers deploy and manage end-to-end solutions that they need. So in terms of storage services, AWS has a wide variety of storage services, as well as other services. At present, AWS has over 160 different service offerings. this is just a representation of some of the storage service offerings that AWS has to give you an idea of the different offerings. So AWS offers everything from file, like our Amazon EFS um, file system providing NFS exports, to our fairly recently launched Amazon FSX, which provides both a Windows version as well as a HPC version based on Lustre file system. We have block offerings such as Amazon Elastic Block Store or Amazon EBS that offers a block storage to EC2 instances, as well as Instant Store, which provides ephemeral NVMe connected uh, storage to instances. And finally, we have Object with Amazon Simple Storage Service or Amazon S3, as well as Amazon Glacier. Now, these services are very often associated with today's topic, which is backup. Very often customers are using Amazon S3 or Amazon Glacier as part of their backup solution, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a minute. Amazon also, or AWS also offers several different data transfer solutions, some of which are listed here, and we'll also get into some of these in a moment, such as Snowball, in more detail. So in terms of Amazon S3, Amazon S3 offers what we call storage classes, and these storage classes are designed to help meet customers' needs along the life cycle of their data. And they go all the way from our standard tier, which is designed for active data that's going to be accessed on a regular basis, to also our standard intelligent tiering, to customers who need their data less frequently accessed with our infrequently accessed tier, both their standard infrequently accessed tier as well as our one zone and infrequently accessed tier. And finally, for customers who need their data archived as more long-term solution, customers are able to take advantage of Amazon S3 Glacier as well as Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive, which is a newer tier that was, or newer storage class that was released just a couple of months ago. And all these storage classes, with the exception of one zone, are protected across 3 different availability zones at AWS. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, our availability zones are at least one physical building or physical data center, and often can be more than that. So I wanted to take a moment to just dive a little bit deeper into Amazon S3 intelligent tiering, as it is one of our newer storage classes, and it's a very important one, especially as it comes to different storing things like backup data, especially data that's deduplicated, where you may not have full understanding of what data is tied to what objects are tied to things that are going to be accessed versus not going to be accessed. So one thing that Amazon S3 intelligent tiering gives you is it automates the tiering for customers when they have changing access patterns. And what does this really mean? So there's two tiers to intelligent tiering. There's a frequently accessed tier and an infrequently accessed tier. And from a pricing perspective, these align with S3 standard and S3 infrequently accessed. The big difference is with S3 standard and frequently accessed, customers can set policies to move that data based on when that data is written and how it ages. With S3 intelligent tiering, AWS actually handles that functionality for you, and we're able to identify based on how that data is accessed and how often it's accessed, whether that data should exist on the frequently accessed tier or the infrequently accessed tier. And we're able to automatically move that data between those two tiers. So it's not only tiering down, but it also gives the ability to tier up, and that's all handled on the back end by the AWS intelligence. Nothing has to be done by the customer. So any data that is landed on this tier or is landed on this storage class of Amazon S3 is automatically handled in terms of tiering for the customer. So the other storage class that I mentioned that is relatively new is Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive. And with Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive, there's very compelling TCO that customers are able to achieve. First of all, unlike solutions that require tapes, there's no tapes for customers to manage here. So if any customers are utilizing tapes on premises, either online in an archive or sending to an offsite facility, this solution could really help them manage that storage or that long-term retention at a compelling price point without having the challenges with managing tape. It's also similar to the other S3 storage classes. It's designed for 11 nines of durability, which is significantly more durable than customers could typically achieve in an on-premises solution. Just like the other storage classes that I mentioned with S3, Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive is also protected across 3 or more AWS availability zones. So customers using this storage class are able to recover their data that's stored in there, within a relatively short amount of time comparatively. So they're able to achieve recovery of that data within hours versus perhaps days or weeks to recover from an offsite tape and have tape shipped around and delivered. And finally, as I mentioned, in terms of the price point and the compelling TCO that this storage class offers, you could see that it's about 0.00099 per gigabyte per month, which translates to about $1 per terabyte a month, or a little under $1 per terabyte per month. And that's about a quarter of the cost of S3 Glacier. So in terms of data transfer, I mentioned that AWS has many different types of data transfer methodologies. One of the key ones that our customers get benefit from, and that is also able to be used with the Commvault solution, is the AWS Snow family and AWS Snowball. So there's 4 different offerings within the Snow family that range all the way from the original AWS Snowball, which is a ruggedized storage device that can be shipped from an AWS region to a customer's facility, where they can load up the data locally and send that up to Amazon S3 without having to send that data over the network. It's secured both from a physical perspective as well as from a data perspective, encrypting all the data with on that device with a KMS encryption key. Then there's the AWS Snowball Edge, which comes in 2 different flavors, both storage optimized and compute optimized. As you can see in both those flavors, there's a fairly significant amount of compute capacity, and customers are able to not only store their data on there. So it works similar to how Snowball works, where it gets shipped to the customer's facility, but customers can actually run compute services on there. In previous iterations, customers were able to just run Lambda functions, but now customers can run full EC2 instances, on the Snowball edges. So customers can run one or multiple instances that can run any software that the customer needs to do any edge processing on those devices. Finally, there's the AWS Snowmobile for customers that need to do very large, petabyte scale data transfers. Each Snowball is able to handle very large scale transfers, even to the exabyte scale, and has shares the same security as the other Snowball devices, both from a physical and a logic and a data encryption perspective. So in terms of backup and restore in general, that we see sometimes customers have challenges with on premises is three kind of major areas. One, as I mentioned previously, with managing tapes or other on-premises infrastructure, it's difficult for customers to be able to manage that, especially in terms of scalability, being able to keep up with the demand for additional capacity and performance, and to meet customers' needs. It's also generally very costly to build and maintain that on-premises storage infrastructure. And finally, with additional compliance needs constantly coming out for customers, whether that's their internal compliance needs or compliance needs with various different programs like GDPR, customers are finding it difficult to achieve those compliance needs with on-premises infrastructure, especially in terms of long-term storage. So what are some of the benefits that customers see with using AWS for backup and restore? Well, it provides them a secure and integrated environment. They're able to use the various AWS services, which all provide, many different offerings in terms of encryption, both in transit and at rest, so that customers are able to securely control access to their environment. It's very easy to maintain, unlike having to build and maintain on-premises hardware infrastructure. Customers are able to just log on to the AWS console and provision resources as they need them. It's also highly scalable. For example, with Amazon S3, which I mentioned earlier, customers are able to get virtually unlimited capacity for any of their backup needs without having to pre-purchase or acquire any kind of storage media on premises. And because AWS, provides services where you pay based on consumption, it's able to lower costs for customers because they're only paying for the actual resources that they use. So in addition to the AWS services, as I mentioned earlier, partners and our AWS Storage Competency partners bring a lot of benefits to customers in terms of running their workloads. For one, they make it a lot easier for customers to configure and to get started with running their workloads on AWS and protecting their data on AWS. Partners offer things like incremental backups as well as deduplication. They offer replication capabilities as well as being able to do policy-based backups. They're also able to help customers to rapidly recover their data that's backed up onto the AWS platform, as well as provide a very cost-effective TCO for customers who protect their data with AWS without the challenges that they have on premises. So one of the other key aspects of protecting your data set on AWS, and especially as we talk about today's topic, is not only the ability to get your data there, but the ability to be able to utilize your data and your workload once you get onto the AWS platform. So customers who want to be able to utilize AWS to recover that data and to recover those workloads, it's important to have all the different choices that that AWS provides in terms of compute options. AWS has over 175 different instance types to choose for that can really help customers address any kind of workload that they have. Everything from general purpose workloads to workloads that really require high level compute, memory, or storage requirements. Even customers who require things like GPUs. So customers are able to choose different processor types. They're able to choose different memory and storage footprints, and networking that now goes up to 100 gigabits per second per instance. In addition to that, customers are able to get access to block level storage, as well as different other elastic resources that help customers really meet their needs. Finally, AWS, as I mentioned, AWS helps with security and also helps in terms of compliance. AWS has, over 200 different security certifications and assurance programs that we work with. These include things like ISO 2717 and 2718 for cloud privacy and security, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. Customers could be HIPAA and PCI compliant on AWS, as well as GDPR compliant. And even when it comes to governmental regulations like FedRAMP and ITAR, customers are able to meet those compliance requirements on the AWS platform. With that, I want to turn it over to Gina, who's going to take you a little bit through the Commvault solution on AWS.
Thanks, Henry. This is Gina James, and now we'll talk about Commvault on AWS, a single solution for data management in the cloud. Commvault Complete Backup and Recovery is the one solution for all your data protection needs. Commvault offers a single interface for on-premises data centers and public cloud environments, and we offer robust reporting, auditing, and alerting capabilities that you can see here in this screenshot from our command center. The Commvault Command Center simplifies the management of complex data tasks, from centralizing reporting, auditing, and day-to-day monitoring. At a glance, a user or admin has access to daily performance and alerts, SLA compliance, and weekly trending. And every component that you see on the Command Center allows you to drill down, so you can click on it and get granular analysis for each of these different reports. In addition, from the Command Center, you're able to manage all your different data protection operations, from archiving, recovery, disaster recovery, and replication. You have the full Commvault arsenal at the click of a button, and all of this without any custom scripting or deploying point solutions. Now, as we start and talk about Commvault's extensive support for AWS services, it's important to know where we began. We started backing up to S3 and just sending copies of the data into S3 buckets. And this was really common the way that most of the backup vendors started. We were one of the first to write natively into S3 storage. And writing natively is a big differentiator because it eliminates the cost and complexity of using a gateway device that can broker communications into the cloud. Once we had that data into S3, we wanted to think about, well, how can we actually use the data? How can we help our customers activate the potential of that data? So now we support migration and replication of on-premises workloads directly into AWS. And this includes virtual, physical, and application data. What that means to you is if you're migrating an on-premises SQL server, with Commvault, it's as simple as restoring the application and choosing AWS RDS as the destination. No scripting required. This is the same for VMware. If you're moving a VM directly into EC2 with Commvault, again, we can move that workload directly into EC2, no scripting from your team. Being able to perform fluid data protection and recovery to the cloud opens up more capabilities for you to do things like point-in-time tests, dev test allocations, and cloud disaster recovery. Not just a disaster recovery whenever an event occurs, but planning for it and doing disaster recovery tests when you want to do it. In addition, because we support so many of the different storage tiers, we allow our customers to right-size their storage within the compliance and budget requirements that you might have. And this brings us to the recent addition of Commvault support for S3 Glacier Deep Archive that Henry mentioned earlier. We'll cover that more in a couple of slides, but this just demonstrates how Commvault has deep integration with AWS and does work to launch support of our features within those different storage classes on the day of release with AWS. Now let's talk a little bit more about how Commvault protects Amazon EC2 instances and Amazon EBS volumes. Commvault is a policy-based data protection engine. We create a plan that describes where and how often the data will be protected, and we create a plan of what will be protected. The advantage of this system is that it allows EC2 management to chart its own course without being encumbered with an extra layer of server management. Instance protection can be designated by AZ, region, name patterns, and most importantly, tags. Our customers can dictate the protection of an instance that needs 4-hour snapshots, hourly logs, and multi-regional copies by tagging it with backup true and backup level platinum. No lengthy procedures, no learning a new interface. Mechanically, we support snapshots, streaming, and both at the same time. We can even manage the snapshot replication across regions. When using a mixture of snapshots and streaming backups, we mount the snap and take an offline copy into S3. This copy is compressed, encrypted, and deduplicated for maximum cost savings. To summarize, Commvault gives you comprehensive EC2 protection. We auto-discover EC2 instances based on user-defined criteria. We leverage the EC2 EBS snapshots for fast backups and restores, combined with Commvault IntelliSnap management. Snapshots can be replicated to other regions for disaster recovery purposes. And streaming backups leverage compression and deduplication to reduce storage costs for your longer-term backup needs. Commvault provides native access to Amazon Glacier and S3 Deep Archive. As I mentioned earlier, we did launch with S3 Glacier Deep Archive on day one. And as Henry said, this is the latest and lowest cost storage offering at 99 cents a terabyte, which is an amazing price and does finally really allow our customers to move off of tape and into AWS with Commvault. Our support for AWS storage tiering does allow you native access to the different tiers. And that means you don't have to be general with a lifecycle policy. You can be specific with your business or policy requirements. General data can be protected and stored in a compressed and deduplicated format for fast response in S3, and then longer-term copies can be written directly into Glacier or S3 Glacier Deep Archive. Following strategies like weekly and monthly full retentions, and going beyond those capabilities, you can even retain at a file level, like all the documents from a particular server being copied into Glacier for 7 years. Being able to create very specific retention policies really can reduce your long-term storage costs. So to recap, we don't require any separate gateways or VTL emulators, and Commvault supports all the different S3 storage tiers, including S3 standard, standard infrequent access, one zone infrequent access, and intelligent tiering. We also support Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive and S3 cross-region replication and data lifecycles. Now, what happens when you have a lot of data and you've got to get it into the cloud? Sometimes there just aren't enough hours in the day to move your data into the cloud, even if you have AWS Direct Connect or dedicated VPN connectivity. Sometimes you really need a large amount of data moved via devices like Snowball and the Snowball family that Henry spoke about. And with Commvault, the great news is we've offered that compatibility from the very early days. Commvault can create our content store directly on the Snowball device. And this allows us to put a baseline copy of the data directly into Snowball. And then once the Snowball device arrives within AWS, that copy of the data is loaded up into S3, and Commvault is able to sync out of band into the S3 data center. And once that's up and running, our backups will continue on site without interruption. Commvault seamlessly cuts over to the cloud baseline once the data protection is back online and up and running. And overall, we support all of the different versions of Snowball, so Snowball Edge, Snowmobile, and we support full compression, deduplication, and encryption with these devices. So your data is secure in transit, and this lowers your overall cost to get the data into AWS. Now let's talk a little bit about a joint customer, a global sports brand who is looking to protect petabytes of data spread across thousands of servers and virtual machines in dozens of countries. This customer had a big challenge. They had multiple data centers. They were using multiple point products for backup and recovery. They had on-prem data centers that were costly and not scalable. They needed 24/7, 365 uninterrupted operations, and they needed to accommodate unplanned maintenance and IT failures, all the while across highly replicated data spans and availability zones and regions. So let's dig into some of the challenges this customer faced. First, they had data centers all over the world. On-premises data centers are expensive to run, and they're difficult to scale quickly and cost-effectively. This drove them to explore a cloud-first strategy because they really wanted their engineers and developers to be able to focus on building solutions for their business, not necessarily running a data center. They recognized AWS as the company that would provide all the flexibility and skill they needed. So they began to get out of the data center business and move into the cloud-first model. This drove their second challenge, which was how to protect the data, both while it's still on-prem and in the cloud. They needed to protect a broad set of platforms, everything from VMware to EC2, Oracle, RDS, Salesforce, and more. And as with many global companies, protecting and managing large volumes of data had become an enormous challenge. And more importantly, they needed to be able to scale to accommodate the relentless growth fast, not at the slow rates of having to build out power and infrastructure in a data center. Their requirements were specific. They needed to reduce from multiple point products to a single enterprise data protection solution across the enterprise. Too many point products was costly and labor intensive, required silos of hardware and personnel to operate all of those different products. They needed day-to-day operations to be resilient enough to accommodate unplanned maintenance, outages, and IT failures with minimal disruption. And their data was highly replicated, and because it was spread across multiple availability zones and regions, it posed a challenge for the limitations from the point solutions that they were using. In today's landscape, requirements like these have become the standard for many enterprises. So let's look at how we were able to work with the customer and AWS to help. The Commvault and AWS Solution included consolidating and eliminating data centers, simplifying their backup operations down from 5 different products to 1, and streamlining the on-premises data center migration to AWS Cloud with comprehensive data protection with Commvault. Working with Commvault and AWS, the company adopted an environment that is highly redundant, fault-tolerant, and protected across multiple availability zones and geographic regions. In addition, leveraging the AWS scalable architecture, the customer's engineering team can focus on building applications to drive better business outcomes and help deliver the best possible customer experience for both their distribution chain and their direct customers. Commvault's comprehensive data management capabilities include backup and recovery and disaster recovery, all with native integration with Amazon Cloud Storage. All storage, backup, and disaster recovery functions communicate with one another in a single solution, regardless of where the data resides, on-premises, in the cloud, or across hybrid environments. And we also allow the customer to leverage any tier of AWS storage that they would like to use. And this provides a reliable, innovative, and highly scalable solution that can easily accommodate their current needs and provide a solid foundation for their future needs and requirements. It's also easy to deploy, manage, and offers fault-tolerant design across all their data and applications. Commvault's global deduplication of databases minimizes storage consumption while accommodating their highly replicated data across multiple AWS zones and regions. So let's talk about results. Now, this customer has full protection of their cloud compute. They have fault-tolerant design with disaster recovery on the AWS cloud, and they're able to leverage the easy-to-use interface for self-service options for their end users. In addition, their protection success has risen to 99.69%. And overall, since this transition was completed, the customer now protects over 2,500 servers, more than 1,500 virtual machines, and over 13 petabytes of data. In the solution, it was both cost-effective and easy to deploy, and they gained ease of use, flexibility, improved deduplication ratios, and were able to provide comprehensive protection for both data and applications, regardless of where they reside, on-premises data centers, in the cloud, and across their hybrid environments. Customers realize increased agility, faster time to market, broad platform support, global availability, and cost reductions when they deploy Commvault on AWS. Together, we help our customers focus on what they do best, run their own business, and innovate to stay ahead of the competition. And now I'll pass it back to Henry.
Thank you, Gina. It was great to hear about the Commvault solution on AWS. Now we're going to transition into the live Q&A section. As a reminder, you can submit your written question to the question panel, and in the event that we're not able to answer your question today, we're going to go ahead and follow up with everyone individually via email. So that being said, the first question that we have is for you, Gina, and this is, can you tell us for customers using Commvault, how difficult is it to connect from a on-premises environment to AWS?
Sure, thanks, Henry. It's very easy to connect to AWS. So within the Commvault menu, you can actually select from a drop-down the AWS storage that you want to write to and send that data directly into AWS. There is one other step where you've got to put in your authentication credentials, but literally it's what we call 2 clicks to the cloud. There are even some videos out there that you can reference that walk you through step by step how to do that.
Great, thank you, Gina. I think I'll just as well add to that from a AWS perspective, and I see this this question come up a lot, and you know, how to get started with AWS in general for those customers who are looking to start with their backup solution but don't necessarily have a AWS account currently. So for any of those customers, you're able to go on to the onto AWS's website, and you can sign up for what we call as a free tier account, which gives you access to a certain amount of AWS resources for free for the first 12 months, so you can try things out before you settle on exactly how you're going to utilize those services. It's very easy to get started. Moving on from that, you know, I'm going to summarize a little because we got some questions that are very similar here. So one of the you know, questions that seems to be coming up here in general is in terms of some of the benefits of the Commvault solution, specifically running and protecting instances on AWS. Gina, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we do protect the instances on AWS, and I think there was a slide earlier in the deck that went into a little bit of detail around this, but we have a couple of different ways that we can protect your EC2 instances. We can leverage the EVS Snap with our IntelliSnap capabilities, and we can also do what we call streaming backups, where we install the Commvault agent in the guest. And in many cases, we'll recommend a combination of those. If you have a large EC2 instance, you might want to have both operations running simultaneously.
Great, thank you, Gina. So another question is, you know, my company has some backup data in the cloud, but we haven't quite made the full transition. So how does it typically work with customers making that that cloud transition? Gina, would you be able to talk on that a little bit?
Sure. What we see in many cases is customers will first start sending backup data into AWS, and when they start, they'll just send a backup copy into S3 or S3 IA And then the next thing that we typically will see is they'll decide, well, I want to test that and see if I can do a disaster recovery test, right? So maybe they'll pick a SQL server, or, maybe even it's just a file server, whatever, and they'll go ahead and do a test restore, taking that data and restoring it in EC2. And once they see how easy that is, really the next step that I've seen a lot is customers decide, well, whenever hardware starts to need to be refreshed, instead of refreshing that hardware on-prem, they just start moving those workloads directly into AWS with Commvault and protecting those workloads. Running in EC2, they just send a secondary copy into one of the S3 tiers, and then for long-term archive, the S3 Glacier Deep Archive is a great option for that.
Great, thank you, Gina. So the next question is, what's the ingestion speed that one could get to Amazon S3 and Glacier? So Gina, I'll start off with that one, and if there's anything you want to add, please feel free.
Okay.
So for in terms of Amazon S3 specifically, it's really highly scalable, as I mentioned earlier, both from a capacity and a performance perspective, which is generally the dictator of how fast you can ingest is often the network connectivity if you're ingesting in terms of from on-premises to AWS. In those cases, it depends on how the customer is connecting, and whether it's going over your internet connection, going over VPN, as well as network services that AWS offers that sometimes are, our largest customers in terms of backups, often do utilize, which is AWS Direct Connect, which gives you a dedicated 1 or 10 gigabit circuit that connects you from your facilities or your colo facility to an AWS region. And over that direct connect, you get that dedicated bandwidth that's just going to AWS. So if you have a large amount of backups that are being sent to AWS, some customers are able to utilize that to give them additional bandwidth on top of what they may have with their internet provider. In addition to that, another factor to keep in mind is, with deduplication, the amount of data that's sent over the wire is less than you might be sending over if you're storing on tapes without deduplication. So that's just another factor to take into account in terms of both ingestion speed and the amount of storage that will ultimately be utilized on the AWS platform. Gina, anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it great. Thank you, Henry.
Okay, great. Let's move on here to the next question. So the next question, I think this is about the the DR solution in general, and this is what were some of the components that that Commvault integrated with or utilized on AWS in order to achieve disaster recovery. Gina, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So as far as the different components that Commvault leverages, obviously we have the Commvault software, and we will protect the data, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. But when we are going to perform a disaster recovery operation, there are, several things that you'll need in place within the AWS infrastructure. So we'll definitely require a copy of the data up in S3 or one of the storage classes that we can recover from. And then in addition to that, we will need some of the EC2 instances running in order for us to perform that restore. Typically within Commvault, we do have what's called a ComServe, which is kind of the master controller in the environment, and a media agent. That ComServe and media agent could live on-prem, but realistically, if you're going to be performing disaster recoveries in AWS, we would recommend that you have a media agent at a minimum running in AWS to perform those disaster recovery restores. And at that point, then, you would be spinning up EC2 instances for the workloads that you're restoring into AWS as well. So hopefully that answered the question there, Henry.
Yeah, great, Gene. I think that's very helpful. And as I mentioned earlier in the webinars, we're talking about, spinning up those various different EC2 instances. Customers are able to choose from a wide variety of those different instances that can really meet like any of the needs that they're ultimately going to need from a workflow perspective, potentially giving you even more options than to restore to different kinds of instances than you might have the ability to do in a on-premises type disaster recovery solution. So, if for a DR test, for example, you need to size the instances, one way which may be a smaller instance type, or you can size them up to a higher instance type in the account where you have an actual disaster that you need to recover from with full performance, of that production instance. Oftentimes, customers can get performance, even higher than what they could achieve elsewhere. Okay, so. Let's see what the next question is. So one of the questions here is, if a customer needs to understand things like sizing and architecting the solution, how do they best get help doing that, knowing how to really start that transition? Do you want to take that, Gina?
Sure. So we have some jointly validated reference architectures that are available at www.commvault.com/AWS. So that would be the first place that you could start. In addition to that, we have a cloud architecture guide that is also available on that same location. So it's just commvault.com/AWS. It's pretty easy to find. And that's definitely where I would start. In addition to that, certainly we do have architects and engineers out in the field who would be happy to help with that. So you could engage with your field sales team, or if you have a partner that you like to work with, we do also have a lot of partners who help do that as well.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, whether you're working with your Commvault account team or your AWS account team, Commvault and AWS have a partnership and work together. So whichever avenue you come through, we'll make sure to engage the other side as part of that, and both Commvault and AWS can help put that solution together. And as Gina mentioned, there's also, and I mentioned in the webinar, that there's three cogs to that wheel, right? So, in addition to both Commvault and AWS, any customers and all the documentation that customers can use to be able to do this themselves. If customers want to leverage a consulting partner, both Commvault and AWS have many different consulting partners that we work together with. If you're not currently working with a consulting partner and are interested in looking for a consulting partner, AWS has what's called the AWS Storage Competency, which I mentioned in terms of our technology partners, but that also applies to our consulting partners as well. And those partners that are part of the storage competency are listed on the AWS website under consulting partners for storage. So those are partners that have proven expertise in helping customers to deploy various storage solutions like Commvault on the AWS platform. So let's see here. So Gina, the question here is, can you tell me which different third-party tools does Commvault integrate with from an analytics perspective?
Sure. So we do integrate with multiple analytics tools. I think of Click and Tableau. There might be some others. I don't know. I know that we've got Dan Iacano as one of the panelists. Dan, do you want to add to that? Those are the only two that come to mind right now for me, but I know you know more about the analytics tools that we integrate with. Or maybe Dan is on mute. So.
Okay.
Gina, I think Dan is not on right now.
Here.
Okay, well, we can take any further responses to that via email. I think we have time for maybe just one more question. So there's a question that came in if Commvault is able to take backups from a on-premise backup like VMware and be able to restore those to AMIs or EC2 instances.
Yes, so we can back up the VMware and workload and then move it directly into EC2. So that is built into the technology today.
Thank you very much, Gina, and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. To learn more, you can feel free to visit these sites to learn more about AWS storage, to learn more about Commvault, to try Commvault in the AWS marketplace, which makes for a very easy deployment on AWS. And as well as I mentioned earlier, to be able to try AWS for free. With that said, please also remember to fill out your satisfaction surveys after the webinar, and thank you very much for attending today's webinar.